Okay, good morning, everybody. There's the world of halacha, there's a world of politics, and then there's reality. And these are three very distinct categories. And we are living in a very difficult time because all of those three categories are meshed together when Israel is in the middle of a war, surrounded by hostile nations that want to destroy it and see that it ceases to exist. The halacha deals with this in many different ways. Politics determines other actions which aren't always in consonance with the halacha. And then, of course, there's the reality that the elected leaders of Israel have to deal with. For a long time, these questions were theoretical until Israel became a reality as a political entity. All the halachos of what you do when somebody's trying to kill you, how you respond, these are geared to a situation where Israel has the authority to act when somebody threatens your existence. But that hasn't happened since I would say, 100 years before the destruction of the temple, because Israel was under the Roman yoke. And the theoretical discussions took place. So our question is, again, we're dealing from a halachic perspective. The political realities are very, very different, and I don't envy the decisions that have to be made, because there's no right or wrong decision, because there are ponim lakan and ponim lakan. For example, the major problem today, before we get into the treatment of hostile civilian populations, the major issue today, on October 7th, many Jewish hostages were taken prisoner. Okay? And one of the most important mitzvos is Pidyon Shvuyim, getting back people that were held as hostages. That is a major mitzvah to save Jewish lives. On the other hand, Israel's existence is being threatened from a military perspective. How do you not respond when somebody invades your territory, when somebody kills your community and disrupts the entire country's life? People were killed, people were tortured, communities were destroyed. How do you not respond? Which priority? I mean, this is an issue that ethicists and halachists are dealing with. How do you balance priorities? Which priority takes precedence? Saving lives, saving the country, responding to both of these situations. Which do you respond to first, if you can only pick one? Now, I understand the angst and the anger and the frustration of all the parents and relatives and spouses of the hostages. They want their families back. Understandable. And we should do everything we can to get them back. On the other hand, how do you not respond when you are invaded? And how do you treat not only the invading army, but the question that we're going to try to deal with today is, how do you deal with the civilian population of the countries or the entities that are attacking you? Is there a different set of rules? Now, I should say parenthetically, and this is something the world is not aware of, I don't think. Every soldier in the IDF, after the military training, there are many other areas of training that everybody has to go through. They take them to the Holocaust Museum. They're given an historical perspective of the creation of the state of Israel, because most of them don't have that. And they're taken around, they're taken to the Kotel, they're taken here. It's part of their educational process. There is a course And I sat in on one of these courses. It's a phenomenal course called Tohar HaNeshek. Literally, how do you deal halakhically with the civilian population in wartime? How do you respect them? How do you check a Muslim woman for explosives in a way that doesn't affect her modesty? I mean, these are serious issues which affect the population on both sides. Do you regard them as subhuman? Do you regard them as people? How do you deal with them when a kid could be having a bomb under his keffiyeh? I mean, but they deal with it. It's a whole course, and it's an amazing thing. So we know, and this is a horrible byproduct of the ongoing war. We know that the civilian population, the Arab civilian population in Israel, is brought up in their mother's milk to be hostile to Israel, to the existence of the state of Israel as a country, and also to be hostile to Jews. It's an article of faith to destroy Israel and to kill Jews. That, unfortunately, is something that the population has been drilled into from birth, practically. Now, there are many, many very fine Arabs and Muslims in Israel. And it's an amazing thing which escapes the attention of the rest of the Arab world. But those Arabs who decided to remain in Israel after statehood are an integral part of society. They have voting rights, they have professions, they have education, they serve on the Supreme Court, they have a very high standard of living, much higher than their Arab brethren who are living in these settlement camps, who could have had the same standard of living if they had just accepted the existence of Israel. But they refuse to do that. As a result, you have these horrible refugee camps, which the Arab nations, the oil-rich nations, could have resolved decades ago, but they chose not to. They want to use them, and they don't understand, and it's a tragedy, that they are being used as pawns in this political fight. Their own people are being starved, are being mistreated, malnourished. I mean, all these things they're accusing Israel of doing is what they are doing to themselves. In this horrible mistake of giving Gaza back to the Palestinians, and the word Palestinian is a misnomer because there's no such entity as Palestinians. Jews born in Israel prior to 1948 are Palestinians. And I think it's only this year that they allowed on passports of people born in Jerusalem to say Jerusalem. Not because until this year or last year, if you were born in Jerusalem, your passport and birth certificate simply said Israel. Because Jerusalem was fought over as to Arab or Israel. So the court finally said, okay, we'll let them use the word Jerusalem. It's a terrible situation. In any event, this is the political reality. The halacha deals with it from a different perspective. The halacha assumes that we have the capacity to function al pi halacha. And Israel, in fact, does have the ability to function within halacha regarding the civilian population, which is hostile to Israel's very existence. And it's an article of faith. And all of these organizations, Hamas, PLO, Hezbollah, in their constitution, it says, eradicate Israel and kill the Jews. That is an article of faith. So how do we deal with this from a halakhic perspective? Again, it's theoretical on the one hand, but it's also very practical. There are three categories. And again, it's not a reality until 1948, in most cases. Israel did not have the capacity to function as an independent political entity until 1948. A hostile population living in Israel can be categorized as a rodef. A rodef is a person who wants to kill you. The halacha is, if somebody wants to kill you, and is coming after you and pursuing you, you can kill them. Somebody else can kill them. If I see somebody running after you with a knife, I can take him down. You can take him down. Question is, must you kill him? Or should you try to wound him to incapacitate him first? That's a separate discussion. But any individual or group of individuals who are bent on your destruction, on killing you, are considered halachically as a rodef, and you are allowed to kill them or that individual. That's category number one. Category number two that the post can deal with is what limits are there to take down this aggressor, which leads us to the third category. What's the status of a civilian population during war? And Israel has been pretty much in a perpetual state of war since its creation. So those are the three categories that the poskim wrestle with. Now, earlier poskim, before Israel became an entity, dealt with this, again, from a purely theoretical perspective, although there were times in the Middle Ages where Jews did have a certain amount of autonomy, and in some cases, the Christian courts would actually act on behalf of the Beit Din to punish capital or corporal punishment in some cases, because they valued the income the Jews are bringing in, so they exercised that jurisdiction for them. But you're not only allowed to kill a rodef, but halachically you must, to save somebody whose life is threatened. And the population of a hostile group of people who, although they are not engaged militarily, the civilian population in Gaza, or the civilian population in other areas of Arab populations in Israel, are considered a rodef simply because they also want to destroy Israel. I'm sorry? Yeah, Arabs in the so-called occupied territory. So those in they are not considered Israeli citizens, but they are definitely considered hostile, and they would very much like to see Israel disappear. So in that situation, they would be called a rodef, even though they're not directly engaged. Now, where does all this begin? As I said, in the Middle Ages, in the early modern period, it was theoretical. But let's think back. We have a biblical scenario. Let's think back to the rape of Dinah. Let's go back to Chumash. Shem ben Hamor, a member of a neighboring tribe, kidnaps Dinah, Yaakov's daughter, rapes her, then wants to marry her. What do her brothers do? They invade Shechem and they murder every citizen. They took revenge on the rape of their sister. So that might be an example of dealing with a hostile neighbor. However, it's not an exact application because, number one, they weren't threatening the entire community. And also bear in mind what happened after they did this. Yaakov criticized the boys. How could, it's, what will the neighbors think? You get a bad reputation. And people will think that we are more aggressive than we should be. So it was tempered, but that's a biblical example of a community that was very, very aggressive. The Or Sameach dealt with this again in a number of tshuvos. The beginning of this halachic controversy. Anybody ever heard of the Arab town called Kibiya? Okay, in 1953, shortly after Israel became a state, the Arabs of Kibiya attacked the settlement in Israel, killed a lot of people. It's one of the neighboring communities. I'm not sure, I think it's near Jordan someplace. But in Kibiya, the Israeli army, with the sanction of the government at that time, went in and practically destroyed the community. They killed the people there for what they did to this. I think a woman and a child were killed, and they destroyed a community, one of the kibbutzim. And with the sanction of the Israeli government, the Israeli army went in and pretty much destroyed that community, Kibiya. And that began the flurry of rabbinic discussion, responsa, on were they justified in doing that. And unfortunately, the outcome, the halakhic outcome, is pretty much that citizens who support and encourage acts of terror are considered rodfim, and therefore you could deal with them in kind. And they justify this particular act. It's not just, all right. There are a number, and then not only that, it goes one even further. There's a Rav Itamar Wahaftik, who was part of the Israeli police, advising the police, discusses the use of weapons against Jews who are in violent demonstrations against the government. How much violence do you use against anti-government protesters, of which there are many, many today? There are people camped out who want their relatives returned. And sometimes these rallies on Saturday night in Tel Aviv get very, very violent. How aggressive can the police be in containing some of these demonstrations? It could also be applied, and this is a very delicate issue, do you apply rodef to people who are involved in social processing, in terms of rallies and things of that sort, when it gets violent? Sometimes these legal categories and processes are being used to achieve political goals. It's a very difficult issue. Another category, and it's difficult to come to a conclusion. We hear the word proportionality of self-defense. Proportionality. Israel is accused very often of overreacting. It's not commensurate to the deed that was causing it in the first place. It's a charge that Israel faces all the time. How far can you go? And when if someone's coming after you, do you have to totally destroy them? Or can you just wound them or disable them if you can? If someone's coming after you with a knife, so can you break his leg or his arm and that will stop him? Or do you have to shoot him? That's also a debate. And again, the leaders of the government are not asking rabbis to make that decision. Now, how do we deal with the hostile Arab populations that support Hamas and Hezbollah and the former PLO and all the other various groups that are intent on Israel's destruction?
Wally.
Yes.
Israel adopts a position which is certainly a true one, that they have to respond with tremendous force and strength to discourage attacks against Israel.
Yes.
So that would, I mean, when a population, an innocent population, is destroyed, that's it seems to me that's a defensive move. It's not it's not over proportionality, for example.
Yeah, well, again, there are those who argue on both sides of the issue. There are those who say if you don't show mercy to somebody who is intent on killing you. Very,
Yeah.
very clear, black and white. There's no proportionality involved. Somebody wants to kill you, you kill them. Period, sof pasuk. However, among the poskim, the Rambam and others, they will tell you if you can stop them without actually killing them, that might be preferable. All right? Also, what about innocent children who will be harmed as a result of your responding to an attack? It's called the double effect. In a military campaign during wartime, is there a leniency, or are we across the board allowed to wipe out a population if it'll achieve? Now the question is, does it achieve your goal, or it simply makes them more angry? And that's a very difficult question to answer. I mean, should we have given Gaza back to the Palestinians? Should we have there's so many times where we gave territory back. And what did they do? We gave them a thriving economical country or state area, and they took all of these pipes and all of the electrical equipment and machinery, and instead of continuing the economy, they used it to build tunnels and missiles, and as a result, now they're claiming, look, we're starving, and we don't have food, we don't have plumbing, we don't have electricity. They had it all, and they destroyed it themselves. But they're doing it to themselves. And when they attack us, we attack them. What about those poor, starving, innocent children and families? Is that simply collateral damage that's acceptable? And again, from a halachic perspective, it is acceptable. As harsh as that may sound, it is acceptable. The world doesn't care about halacha. The world says, look, you're harming innocent women and children. But the fact is, those women, how many times have you had women, innocent women, coming to a border crossing with explosive belts strapped underneath their robes? It's happened more than once. Or they walk into a department store and blow themselves up. Innocent-looking teenagers. There's what Rabbi Ariel calls the collective identity of the members of a participating group. Even the innocent child, unfortunately, is an organ of that greater body, so to speak. And so if you're waging war against a population, it could include women and children. Again, it's theoretical, perhaps, to justify that what has to be done sometimes. Realistically, it's more difficult to apply. There's a tremendous amount of discussion here. Rav Goren, the former chief rabbi of the Israeli Defense Forces and chief rabbi of Israel, wrote about this a lot. And he says that Yaakov's criticism of Shimon and Levi for how they dealt with Shem, he says his negative reaction expresses the rejection of collective responsibility. So he was not a fan of collective responsibility when waging war. He was one of the few that was spoke out about not harming non-combatant populations who are not participating in the war. On the other hand, the other rabbis would say, but every member of that population, even though they may be non-combatants in a strictly legal sense, they support, they encourage that type of activity. And again, since Kibbutz 1953, this has been a big discussion among the rabbis. Now, who has to authorize this? And the rabbis, again, are pretty much united that the killing of civilians is acceptable, provided that it is initiated by the quote-unquote sovereign authority of Israel, not by individual soldiers taking the law into their own hands. And there is a discussion, does the Knesset have a category, a din of melech? We have no kings anymore to make decisions. We have a Knesset. Does the Knesset function as if it were a king? And in terms of what some of the Rabbanim are talking about, we trust the Knesset, which might be a mistake, but we trust the Knesset to make decisions. And once those decisions are made, then legally, halakhically, it's acceptable to carry it out. And I remember I knew a fellow once. He was in the Israeli army as a reservist. And every time he got called up, for some reason, he was sent to Gaza. And the first time he went to Gaza, he was patrolling in a Jeep, and he was passing by a building, and the people on top of the building threw a refrigerator off the roof to land on his Jeep to kill them all. Fortunately, it didn't kill them. They got out of the, they saw what happened. They got out of the Jeep. What did he do? He got a very large weapon, some kind of a cannon, and he leveled the building on his own. He had no authority to do that. You want to kill me? I'm going to show you. And he was brought up on charges. And they got a tap on the wrist, whatever. Next time he goes back to Gaza, for the 2 weeks that he was in Gaza, it was quiet. Because the Arabs called this one guy, he's very tall, so it's easy to pick him out, Maslum, the crazy one. But they didn't bother him. For the 2 weeks that he was on duty as a reservist in Gaza, quiet. So he reacted, I think, halakhically. You're going to try to kill me? I'm going to wipe you out. And that's what happened. So again, officially, he wasn't sanctioned to do what he did, but he did it anyway. And he left him alone. So from that perspective, this type of activity works. The Rambam, in fact, encourages individuals to act in these situations. The majority of Rishonim, quote unquote, living in Golos, do not agree with him. And their philosophical position is, if the state, if the melech, or that authority acting as the melech, authorizes this action, it's legitimate. But individuals can't do it on their own, which on a certain level makes sense. So if the Knesset says it's okay, as they did in the case of Kibbutz. Now, is there a discussion right now about taking out civilian populations? I don't think so. But I think everybody understands that the civilian populations in these Arab strongholds, in the occupied territories, and in Gaza and so forth, and right now that debate is going on. Should they level Gaza and make it into another settlement? And by the way, plans are being made already as we sit here to build buildings and yeshivos in the northern part of Gaza already, which is totally desolate. There are those in the government, from the settler movement, who are very interested in making Gaza another settlement. And halakhically, it could be justified. Politically, it's another story. But if you get rid of Gaza as an Arab entity, at least in that particular area of the country, it might be quiet. Up north, if the truce holds, maybe there'll be peace there too. But clearly, this is an issue that the poskim are grappling with from a halakhic perspective. It's legitimate because the native population in the Arab areas clearly are intent in destroying Israel. No question about it. So from a halakhic perspective, we can definitely do that. From a political perspective and world opinion, different story. The world loves an underdog. In 1947, the Jewish people after the Holocaust were the underdog. Now it's the poor Palestinians who are doing this to themselves, but they're the underdog. So the world supports. So the mixture of politics and halacha and reality is a very difficult combination to navigate. Halachically, Israel has every justification to wipe out a population that is intent on its destruction. It never had that capacity before. It has that capacity now. Whether it's wise to do that, that's a political question.
Wally,
Yes.
suppose the occupying force is like Hamas. They're occupiers. The Palestinians, the people of Gaza, don't necessarily want this type of ongoing war.
Okay, but their solution is for Israel to surrender. Not going to happen.
Well, that's Hamas's position.
And
That's what they want.
And the population supports that.
Well, we don't know that.
Oh, yes, we do. Oh, yes, we do. That's part of their indoctrination.
Mhm.
Every child is taught that with his mother's milk. Now, again, you can contrast, and this is a very important thing, which we'll conclude with.
Mhm.
Those Arabs who are citizens of Israel have a very nice standard of living, most of them. They have jobs, they earn an income, they serve in civil service positions, they get an education, they even serve on the Supreme Court, and they're in the Knesset. Okay? As a matter of fact, every hotel in Israel has Arabs who work there. In the dining room, at the front desk on Shabbos. I'm told that there are 7 Arab families that control all of the hospitality jobs in Israel. Well, through their nieces, nephews, aunts, uncles, 7 families. And if any member of one of those 7 families supports the anti-Zionism of the radical Muslims, they get dealt with very severely. They want their jobs. They want their standard of living. Don't mess up. Don't join these hostile anti-Israeli forces. If you do, you'll be in for trouble. The people who accept Israel's existence, again, in 1948, they told all the Arabs, come join us, and we're going to march into Tel Aviv, and you can have all their houses and their businesses and everything. And many of them left, and they're still out there. The ones that remained became Israeli citizens and have a very high standard of living. It would seem from a logical perspective that the choice is very clear. But when you're operating based on ideology, and it's not just the radical Arab terrorists, Islam itself, if you study Islam, Islam is based on global expansion. Look what happened in Indonesia. They took over the whole country. They want to control the world. That's their goal, to spread Islam. How do you spread it? With the sword. And what's his name? Omar II, Muhammad's grandson, after trying to convert everybody in the Arabian Peninsula, realized you can't kill everybody who won't accept Islam. So he developed something called the Pact of Omar, where he made an agreement with all the monotheistic Christianity and Judaism not the pagans, but Christianity, if they would accept second-class citizenship, they call it dhimmi status, then we're not going to kill you. We will tolerate your existence. And for a long time, Jews living in the Muslim countries were dhimmi. They weren't bothered. They couldn't build a shul higher than the mosque. They had to walk in the street, not on the sidewalk. They could only ride donkeys, not horses. It was second-class citizenship, but you were allowed to live in Muslim countries without being persecuted. Okay? That doesn't exist anymore. But the theoretical premise of world domination still exists. And that's why they want to take over as many countries as they can. Anyhow, the halacha is very clear. If somebody seeks your destruction, you can take them out. If you can take them out without necessarily killing them, fine. But if you have to, go for it. That's the halachic justification. Politically, that's a decision that the Knesset has to make. And when the two of them merge, the halakha is very clearly, if it's sanctioned by the Knesset, acting as the quote-unquote melech in this category, then it would be permissible. But that's the halachic issue of dealing with a hostile population. Yes? I can't hear you. No.
Similar with Americans who want to intward Americans and Japanese.
Good question. It's a good question. Is a similar situation that America